Why did a bleeding, pregnant, albino elephant choose a human village for help? And what did she leave behind that stunned everyone? From her first trembling steps to the miraculous final moment, every second held a story of trust and life itself. Stay with us, because this is a story you won't believe until you see it. The morning the ground began to tremble. Dawn arrived quietly, the way it always did in the village, with pale light slipping over mud roofs and dew clinging to grass blades like tiny mirrors. Roosters crowed, smoke rose from early cooking fires, and bare feet pressed into familiar soil. Nothing looked different, yet something felt wrong. The air carried a weight that made people pause mid-step, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Farmers were the first to notice it. While walking toward their fields, they felt a faint vibration underfoot, not strong enough to knock balance away, but steady enough to feel unnatural. At first, it was dismissed as distant thunder or heavy machinery far beyond the hills, but the sky was clear, and the nearest road lay miles away. The trembling continued, slow and rhythmic, as though something enormous was moving closer, step by step. Dogs reacted before humans understood. They stopped barking and pulled their tails low, ears twitching toward the forest edge. Birds lifted suddenly from trees in uneven bursts, breaking the usual morning patterns. Even the cattle shifted restlessly, snorting and turning their heads toward the same direction. Instinct was spreading faster than logic. Women stepped out of doorways, wiping hands on cloth, eyes scanning the horizon. Children, sensing unease, clung closer to adults instead of running ahead. A low hum traveled through the village, not a sound exactly, but a pressure that settled in chests. People exchanged looks that asked silent questions no one wanted to speak aloud. Closer to the tree line, the ground softened under the repeated impact of something heavy. Dry dust rose in brief clouds, then fell again. Each vibration arrived with a pause between it, deliberate and measured. Whatever was coming was not rushing. It was walking with intention. Old men who had lived through decades of floods, droughts, and wandering wildlife frowned deeply. They had felt Earth move before during storms or landslides, but this was different. This movement had rhythm. It had a purpose. One of them pressed his palm flat against the soil, as if listening through skin and bone. Whispers began to travel. Some said it must be a wild animal driven out by hunger. Others suggested it could be a herd passing near the border of the forest. No one said the word elephant yet, because elephants did not come here. Not alone. Not this close. The trembling grew stronger, enough now to rattle loose stones and make hanging pots clink softly against walls. A few people backed away toward their homes, while others moved forward despite fear, drawn by curiosity they could not control. Every instinct pulled them in opposite directions at once. Then the wind shifted. With it came a scent unfamiliar to the village, earthy and raw, mixed with something metallic that made throats tighten. The forest seemed to open slightly, branches parting just enough to hint at movement within the shadows. Leaves shook without wind touching them. Silence spread wider, swallowing conversation and sound alike. Time stretched strangely in those moments. No one spoke. No one ran. They simply watched the edge of the world they knew, waiting for whatever had decided to cross into it. Hearts beat louder than footsteps now, and fear blended with awe in equal measure. Somewhere deeper in the shadows, a low, almost imperceptible rumble vibrated through the soil, sending tiny pebbles skittering across the ground. Even the animals that had not fled before now paused, ears swiveling, sensing that something extraordinary had arrived. As the trembling reached the edge of the village and the first shape began to emerge from the trees, one thought passed through every mind at once. What kind of being could make the earth announce her arrival before she even appeared? Stay with us as the mystery deepens. A creature no one believed could exist. Out of the parted trees stepped a form so pale it seemed unreal, as if the forest itself had exhaled a ghost. The villagers did not gasp or shout. Their reactions stalled somewhere between disbelief and reverence. Sunlight struck her hide and bounced back in a way no one had ever seen before. Not gray, not brown, but a soft, almost luminous white that made eyes ache to stare too long. People had heard stories, of course. Travelers spoke of rare elephants with skin drained of color, born once in generations and hidden deep within forests where humans never walked. Those tales were usually followed by laughter and headshakes. Such creatures belonged to legends, not village paths. Her ears fanned outward, thin veins visible beneath the pale surface, catching light like fragile paper. Each step revealed her size fully now, towering and powerful, yet strangely quiet in presence. She did not trumpet. She did not charge. She simply advanced, eyes dark and steady, scanning unfamiliar shapes that froze in her gaze. Children who had crept forward were gently pulled back by elders, not out of panic, but respect. This was no ordinary animal wandering too close. There was something sacred about her appearance, something that pressed silence onto every observer. Even those who had hunted all their lives felt their hands slacken at their sides. Her tusks curved forward, long and smooth, unscarred by battles or chains. That alone raised murmurs. Wild elephants often bore marks of survival. This one looked untouched by violence, yet carried a weariness that sat heavy in her posture. Her trunk lowered toward the ground, brushing soil and stones as if confirming she had truly arrived. A man whispered that white elephants were signs, neither good nor bad, but warnings that change was near. Another shook his head and crossed himself, unable to look away. No one dared approach. Distance felt necessary, like standing too close might break an unspoken rule. Flies hovered near her legs, and that was when the villagers noticed something unsettling. She paused often, shifting her weight unevenly. One hind leg trembled slightly when she rested on it. The movement was subtle, easily missed amid the shock of her appearance, but it planted the first seed of concern. Her breathing was deep but controlled, rising and falling with effort rather than ease. Each inhale sounded heavier than it should have. Those who knew animals recognized strain even before they understood its cause. This was not the confident stride of a creature passing through. This was the careful motion of someone pushing through pain. Still, she did not show aggression. When a loose cloth fluttered near her path, she stopped and waited until it fell still. When a goat bleated from a doorway, she turned her head slightly, observing without threat. Her calm unsettled the village more than rage ever could have. Time moved again, cautiously. Someone dared to step sideways for a better view, heart pounding, ready to flee. The elephant noticed and did nothing. Her eye met him for a brief moment, and what he saw there later left him shaken. Not wildness, not fear. Something closer to intention. A low, almost imperceptible rumble came from her chest, vibrating through the ground beneath them. Dust shifted underfoot as if the earth itself responded to her presence. Even the trees seemed to lean inward slightly, their leaves trembling in silent acknowledgement. The villagers felt the weight of something ancient and aware, an intelligence far beyond instinct, a message they could not yet interpret, but that demanded every ounce of their attention. The realization settled slowly but firmly. This creature had not wandered here by mistake. She had not lost her way. She had chosen this place, these people, this moment. That choice carried weight heavier than her enormous body. As whispers grew steadier, one question spread through the crowd, quiet but urgent. Why would a being so rare, so vulnerable to human harm, leave the safety of the forest and step into a world that had never believed she could exist at all? Come with us to explore the hidden corners of the story. Why she crossed the invisible boundary. The village remained frozen, caught between wonder and unease, as the elephant took another slow step forward. This time, she crossed a line no one had drawn, but everyone understood. Beyond the scattered trees lay land shaped by human hands, footpaths worn thin, fields cleared long ago. Wildlife stopped at the forest's edge. Survival demanded it. Yet she moved past that boundary without hesitation. Those who knew the land best felt the weight of that choice immediately. Elephants avoided humans unless driven by desperation. They remembered gunfire, traps, and fire better than any map. Crossing into open ground meant risk with no guarantee of safety. The fact that she did so alone made the decision even more alarming. Her pace revealed intention. She did not wander or pause to graze. She followed a direct line toward the heart of the settlement, navigating around fences and stones as if guided by an internal compass. Every step suggested memory rather than instinct, as though she had walked this path in her mind long before her feet touched it. The villagers began to notice marks along her side, shallow scratches layered over older scars, signs of pushing through dense brush repeatedly. This had not been a single moment of panic. She had traveled far, forcing her body through obstacles that resisted her size. Whatever drove her here had been urging her forward for days, maybe longer. Heat shimmered above the ground, and sweat darkened her pale skin in streaks that traced effort and strain. Her ears flapped, not in warning but to cool herself, signaling exhaustion rather than threat. She was spending precious energy she could not afford to lose. A woman near the well realized something unsettling. The elephant was not scanning for food or water. She ignored the trough, passed by fresh leaves, and did not react to the smell of grain. Hunger was not her reason. Thirst was not her reason. That narrowed the possibilities sharply. The air felt heavier as that truth spread. People shifted their stance, no longer merely observers. The situation demanded interpretation. If this was not a chance, then it was a message, and messages carried responsibility. Her trunk lifted briefly, testing the air, then lowered again. She angled her body slightly, favoring one side, adjusting her balance with careful precision. Each movement was calculated to minimize strain, suggesting pain she refused to reveal openly. Survival had taught her restraint. Older villagers recalled stories passed down quietly, warnings rather than myths. Animals sometimes sought humans when no other path remained, not for mercy, but for intervention. Those tales usually ended badly because humans misunderstood or reacted too late. The elephant stopped near an open clearing and stood still, dust settling around her feet. She did not retreat. She did not advance further. It was a pause meant to be noticed, a line drawn by her rather than the land. Her eyes swept the crowd again, slower this time, meeting faces individually. The gaze held no confusion. It searched, assessed, and waited. Whatever decision she had made was complete. Now, the next move belonged to those watching her. Fear shifted into something more complex, curiosity mixed with obligation. The villagers understood they were no longer dealing with an unexpected visitor. They were standing inside a moment that would demand response, whether they wanted it or not. A soft rustle came from the surrounding trees, drawing every head upward. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying no sound but heightening awareness. Each person felt the weight of presence, of something enormous yet deliberate, demanding recognition. The clearing became a stage, the villagers unwilling actors in a drama written by the pale creature before them. Every breath, every blink held meaning. A distant bird cried out, breaking the silence, and the elephant exhaled deeply. The sound carried fatigue and resolve in equal measure. She had reached the end of what she could do alone. As people edged closer, careful not to provoke her, the unspoken question grew sharper. What kind of danger, pain, or urgency forces a creature built to avoid humans at all costs to step deliberately into their world and wait? Let us guide you into what no one expected. Blood on the dust, silence in the crowd. The first drop fell without warning. It darkened the pale soil near her rear foot, soaking in too quickly to ignore. Someone inhaled sharply, and the sound traveled through the crowd like a spark. Eyes dropped from her massive frame to the ground, where more stains appeared, uneven and fresh, marking each place she shifted her weight. The elephant stood still now, no longer advancing or testing distance. Her stillness felt deliberate, as if movement itself had become too costly. A thin trail ran down her leg, contrasting harshly against her white skin. It was not a surface scratch. This was deeper, seriously. No one rushed forward. Fear snapped back into place, stronger than before. Blood changed everything. It meant danger, unpredictability, and the real possibility of death, hers or theirs. A wounded animal could lash out without warning. Everyone knew that. The smell reached the villagers next, sharp and metallic, carried by the warm air. Flies gathered quickly, drawn to the open wound. She flicked her tail once, irritated but restrained, then let it fall again. Pain showed itself not in noise, but in tension held tightly within her massive body. A hunter stepped closer than the others, stopping several paces away. His eyes followed the blood's path upward, searching for its source. The wound was partially hidden by folds of skin and dried dust, but its severity was clear from the way she favored one side entirely now. She did not back away from him. That was the most unsettling part. Most animals would retreat or threaten or charge. She did none of it. Her head lowered slightly, not in submission, but in something closer to endurance. She was conserving strength. The crowd grew quiet again, but this time the silence was heavier, pressed down by reality. This was no longer a rare sighting or a moment of wonder. This was a living being bleeding in front of them, far from where she should be, with no easy explanation. A child began to cry softly before being hushed. Elders exchanged glances filled with conflict. Helping could provoke her. Leaving her could doom her. Either choice carried risk, and the wrong one would follow them for the rest of their lives. The elephant shifted again, and her leg buckled slightly before she caught herself. Dust rose around her foot, mixing with blood, creating dark patches that spread unevenly. She steadied herself, breathing deeper now, sides expanding with effort. This was not a fresh injury. The blood flow suggested something worsening over time, reopened by long travel. She had walked far like this, step after painful step, without stopping. The realization made throats tighten. A woman near the front noticed her trunk curl briefly inward, brushing her own leg near the wound. The motion was gentle, almost careful, as if acknowledging pain without surrendering to it. Then the trunk lowered again, resting against the ground. No sound came from her mouth, no cry, no trumpet. The restraint felt intentional, almost disciplined. She was controlling her suffering in a way that felt unsettlingly familiar to human eyes. The villagers stood divided between instinct and compassion. Some edged backward, preparing escape routes. Others leaned forward, hands clenched, wanting to act but unsure how. The space between them and the elephant felt charged, fragile, like a single wrong movement could shatter it. Then she did something no one expected. She lowered herself slightly, bending her front legs just enough to shift her center of gravity. It was not a collapse. It was a controlled movement, slow and careful, placing her wounded side closer to the ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She was making herself vulnerable. In that posture, towering yet exposed, bleeding openly onto village soil, she was no longer just a mystery from the forest. She was a patient standing at the edge of endurance, asking a question without words. And the villagers faced a choice they could not delay any longer. Would fear decide for them, or would they step toward a bleeding giant who seemed to be waiting for an answer? Stay here as the next twist unfolds. The one movement that changed everything. No one spoke as the elephant held her lowered position, dust clinging to the damp trail beneath her. The pause stretched long enough for fear to fully bloom, then slowly began to loosen its grip. Something about her stillness invited attention rather than panic, as though she were offering time instead of demanding it. A breeze moved through the clearing, lifting loose fabric and carrying her scent farther into the village. She raised her head slightly, just enough to look directly at the people in front of her. Her eyes were steady, dark, and unblinking. There was no challenge in them, only focus. Then her trunk began to move. At first it lifted cautiously, curling inward before extending forward again. The motion was slow, deliberate, and unmistakably controlled. Every muscle seemed aware of its own strength, careful not to frighten. The tip of her trunk reached toward the ground between her and the villagers, stopping short of the space where fear still lived. People were tense. A few stepped back instinctively, hearts hammering. Trunks could lift trees, crush bone, tear roofs apart. Everyone knew that. Yet she did none of those things. Instead, she placed the tip of her trunk gently onto the earth and pushed a small mound of dust toward herself, revealing darker soil beneath. The gesture was puzzling, almost gentle. She repeated it, clearing a small patch of ground, then rested her trunk there as if anchoring herself. The movement carried no urgency. It felt like a signal meant to be understood rather than obeyed. A man at the edge of the crowd noticed something others missed. The elephant had positioned herself so the wound remained visible, unobstructed. She was not hiding her injury. She was presenting it. The realization spread quietly. This was not a submission. This was trust. The ground beneath her trunk was now bare, clean enough to show the contrast between dry soil and the darker stains nearby. She shifted her weight carefully, angling her body to expose the injured area more clearly. Pain rippled through her frame, visible in the tightening of skin and the tension along her spine. Yet she remained calm. No animal taught to fear humans would do this. An elder stepped forward, slow and deliberate, stopping well before the reach of her trunk. He lowered his hands, palms open, copying the stillness she had chosen. The elephant watched him closely, but did not move. The space between them felt fragile, charged with consequence. Around them, the village held its breath. The elder knelt and pressed his palm against the ground, mirroring her earlier gesture. It was not a plan. It was instinct answering instinct. The elephant responded by lowering her head slightly, a motion so subtle it might have been imagined, yet everyone felt its weight. Trust settled into the clearing, tentative but real. The single exchange changed the shape of the moment. Fear did not vanish, but it stepped aside. Curiosity and responsibility moved forward. People began to understand that she was not here to test them, threaten them, or pass through unnoticed. She had come because she believed they could help. The idea felt enormous. Helping an animal this size, this rare, this injured, with no training or tools, bordered on impossible. Yet the choice no longer felt abstract. She had made the first move. A woman whispered that the elephant's trunk placement resembled how calves sought reassurance from their mothers, touching ground or body to steady themselves. Another noticed how she avoided sudden movements, as if protecting those watching her from their own fear. Time shifted again, no longer stretched thin but pressing forward. The elephant lifted her trunk once more and extended it slightly toward the elder, stopping again before contact. The space between them is closed by inches, not steps. This was the moment everyone would remember. Not the sight of blood, not the shock of her color, but the instant a wild creature chose vulnerability over force. The clearing no longer belonged solely to humans or animals. It belonged to a shared decision unfolding in silence. As people began to step closer, guided by her calm rather than their courage, a question hovered heavily over the gathering. When a being this powerful chooses to trust without words, what responsibility does that place on those who receive it? Stay with us as the secrets grow even darker. The hidden life she protects. People moved closer now, not in a rush, but in a careful widening of the circle. Each step was measured, guided by the rhythm of her breathing and the quiet authority of her presence. The elephant remained still, her trust holding the space together like an invisible thread. Then a sharp intake of breath cut through the hush. Someone had noticed her belly. At first glance, it could have been dismissed as the natural curve of a large body, but the longer they looked, the clearer it became. Her abdomen hung lower than expected, rounded in a way that did not match the rest of her frame. It was not weight from feeding, it was life. The realization spread without words. Faces changed, spines straightened. What had been a crisis became an emergency of a different kind. She was not only injured, she was carrying a calf. For those who understood elephants, the implication landed hard. Pregnancy already strained the strongest bodies. Add injury, blood loss, and long travel, and the danger multiplied. Every step she had taken to reach the village now carried a deeper meaning. She'd been protecting something more fragile than herself. Her sides rose and fell more noticeably as she breathed, the effort no longer hidden. Small tremors ran through her muscles when she shifted, as though her body was fighting multiple battles at once. The villagers realized she had likely delayed seeking help for as long as possible, pushing herself until no other option remained. A woman whispered that pregnant elephants often become fiercely cautious, avoiding risk at all costs. That made this choice even more extraordinary. Crossing into human land while expecting was not bravery. It was desperation shaped by hope. The elephant lowered her trunk briefly toward her belly, resting it there for a moment before letting it fall again. The gesture was subtle, protective, unmistakable. It felt like confirmation rather than discovery. Urgency replaced hesitation. People spoke now, softly but quickly, sharing observations, weighing options. There were no veterinarians, no tranquilizers, no rescue teams, only hands, water, cloth, and whatever knowledge they carried in memory rather than books. Her ears fluttered again, not in warning, but discomfort. Heat pressed down on the clearing, and flies returned in clusters. Someone fetched water without being asked. Another tore clean fabric into strips. The shift from witness to participant happened without announcement. The elephant watched all of it. She tracked movement carefully, eyes following each person as they approached or retreated. When someone moved too quickly, she tensed, then relaxed as they slowed. She was learning them as much as they were learning her. The danger now felt immediate. Stress alone could trigger complications. Blood loss could weaken her beyond recovery. If the calf was born too early, survival would be uncertain. Every decision mattered, and mistakes could not be undone. A man crouched low to the ground, careful to stay within her sight, and studied her breathing. It was uneven now, interrupted by long pauses. Not labor, not yet, but close enough to make time feel slippery. The village had crossed another line, one that could not be stepped back from. Helping her meant committing fully, through whatever came next. Leaving was no longer an option that anyone could live with. As preparations began without instruction, the elephant remained where she was, trusting the movement around her. She did not pull away. She did not retreat to the forest while she still could. She stayed. That choice weighed heavily on everyone present. She had brought her unborn calf into human hands, risking both lives on the belief that these strangers would do what her world no longer could. As water was poured, cloth laid out, and people positioned themselves carefully around her, one thought settled into the air with quiet force. What happens when a life not yet born becomes the reason an entire village must act without knowing if success is even possible? Walk with us into the truth that was never meant to surface. Ordinary people facing an impossible task. Action replaced fear, but it arrived without confidence. No one stepped forward claiming authority. There were no instructions shouted, no plans written in haste. What unfolded instead was quieter, shaped by necessity and common sense rather than skill. People spread out naturally, giving the elephant space while keeping her within reach. Someone shaded her with woven mats to block the harsh sun. Another brought more water, pouring it slowly near her feet so she could feel the coolness without slipping. Every movement was careful, guided by her reactions rather than human urgency. The wound demanded attention, yet no one rushed toward it. They understood enough to know that sudden pain could shatter the fragile trust she had offered. Instead, they observed. They watched how she shifted, when she tightened, when she relaxed. Her body became their guide. A woman who had delivered livestock before spoke quietly, pointing out the way the elephant's breathing changed when pressure built. A farmer recognized the signs of infection from injuries he had seen in cattle. None of this was expertise. It was a lived experience stitched together into something usable. Clothes soaked in clean water were placed within her sight before being used. When someone reached forward, they paused, letting her see the intention before the action. The elephant tolerated touch only when it came slowly, predictably. Anything rushed made her muscles tense. Sweat ran down human backs as much as it did down her pale skin. The heat was relentless. Time felt distorted, stretching and compressing without warning. Minutes felt like hours. Hours vanished without notice. The village had become a single organism, each person adjusting to the others without words. Children were moved away. Fires were put out. Noise faded. Even animals were ushered indoors. Silence became part of the care. Someone noticed her blinking more often, a sign of fatigue. Another realized she leaned heavily on one side to avoid pressure. Adjustments were made quietly, shift in support, change in positions. Nothing was spoken loudly. Voices felt intrusive here. There was no guarantee any of this would work. Infection could spread unseen. Blood loss could worsen. Stress could tip her into collapse. Everyone knew it, yet no one stopped. A man fetched medicinal herbs used for wounds in animals, crushing them into paste. Before approaching, he placed the mixture on the ground and waited. The elephant sniffed the air, then lowered her trunk toward it, acknowledging the scent. Only then was it used. Trust was no longer symbolic. It was practical, fragile, and constantly tested. As the afternoon wore on, fatigue set in. Arms ached, legs cramped, throats burned from thirst. Still, no one left. Taking a break felt wrong, like turning away from something that demanded presence more than strength. The elephant shifted suddenly, startling the group, then steadied herself again. A low rumble passed through her chest, not a sound of warning, but of strain. It reminded everyone that despite her calm, pain remained close to the surface. There were moments of doubt, glances exchanged, silent questions asked. Were they making it worse? Were they misreading her signals? Should they stop before something went wrong? Yet, each time uncertainty crept in, her behavior anchored them. She stayed. She accepted the touch. She allowed proximity. Those choices mattered more than fear. As evening approached, shadows lengthened across the clearing. The work was far from done, and night would bring new risks. Darkness always did. Predators, cold, fatigue, unknown complications. The villagers understood then that this was not a single act of help. It was a commitment unfolding in stages, each one heavier than the last. With the sun dipping low and no clear end in sight, one question pressed itself into every tired mind. How far could ordinary people go when the impossible refused to wait for experts to arrive? Stay close as the layers continue to peel back. Pain, patience, and the cost of trust. Night fell over the village, bringing a cooler hush but no relief. The elephant had lain down now, front legs folded beneath her, back legs stretched carefully to relieve pressure. Each breath was deep and deliberate, rising like a swell of slow waves over her immense frame. The subtle heaving of her sides reminded the villagers that her endurance was still being tested. People worked quietly, side by side, as if unspoken agreement had replaced the chaos of the day. Water was kept close, clothes dampened and ready. Every adjustment was made slowly, almost ritualistically, as though the elephant's reactions could teach them more than any book. The wound had to be kept clean, but even minor mistakes could break the fragile bridge of trust she had offered. A man knelt by her side, brushing dust away with trembling hands. He dared not make direct contact at first. She shifted slightly, raising her head, testing the air. Then, as if approving his patience, she allowed him to gently wipe the dried blood from her skin. No sudden movement, no panic, only measured, deliberate endurance. It was a lesson in resilience and restraint that left the observer trembling with awe. Her breathing faltered now and then, sharp intakes signaling pain she refused to voice. Yet she did not resist. Not once did she thrash. Not once did she attempt to escape. Each step of patience she had offered before now transformed into a full lesson in vulnerability. The villagers realized trust carried a cost far greater than they had imagined. It required complete surrender from both sides. Eyes that had feared her color now filled with empathy. The white sheen of her skin, once alien, now seemed to glow softly in the flickering light of torches. Shadows danced across her form, revealing muscles tensin' and relaxin' in a slow, controlled rhythm. She was monumental, yet fragile, and everyone watching felt that fragility in their own chests. A child peeked from behind a doorway, unnoticed at first, and the elephant lifted her trunk slightly toward the sound. It was a gentle acknowledgement, a nod to the presence of innocence, and a reminder that every life she protected mattered beyond her own. That movement was small, yet the meaning was immense. Patience earned recognition. The village elders began to murmur softly to one another, sharing strategies learned from years of observing animals and handling livestock. None were formal plans, just collective instincts honed over decades. Even so, the elephant seemed to understand that humans could help without causing harm, and that comprehension guided every shift of her massive body. Night deepened, bringing with it the subtle chorus of distant wildlife. Owls hooted softly. Crickets rose and fell in rhythmic patterns. The elephant's ears twitched now and then, sensing every vibration in the air. She was not only enduring physical pain, she was interpreting a world that was foreign, yet made familiar by careful, deliberate observation. The villagers realized something else. Their exhaustion was a mirror of hers. Every hand extended, every careful movement was a silent dialogue. She taught patience through endurance. They responded through compassion. Each act of care became a shared ritual, a bond stronger than fear, shaped by mutual awareness. At one point, she lifted a leg briefly, then settled it slowly, testing the support beneath her. A man adjusted a piece of cloth beneath her body, minimizing friction and discomfort. She stayed still after, eyes half closed, signaling approval. It was a negotiation without words, a dance measured in moments of pain and relief. By midnight, the village had become a quiet watchtower. People sat in pairs, taking turns near her side, ensuring she was never alone. She tolerated their presence not out of coercion, but out of recognition that these strangers had stepped into her world without selfish intent. That trust required constant reinforcement. Every detail mattered. The temperature of the water, the softness of the ground, the timing of movements. Every act of patience paid a small dividend in her calm responses. Pain could not be ignored, but neither could fear dictate action. As the first stars began to fade into a deep pre-dawn glow, one question hovered in the cold air. How long could trust survive when every movement carried risk, and every decision bore consequences for life itself? Let us take you where the story turns shocking. A village bound by one beating heart. Dawn arrived quietly, but the clearing felt different now. The elephant had settled into a careful rhythm, rising and lowering her massive body only when necessary. Villagers moved around her with coordinated precision, their actions synchronized without command. The work of the night had drawn them together, weaving them into a single force driven by a shared purpose. Eyes no longer lingered in fear. They followed her movements, anticipating strain, gauging tension, reading each subtle shift in muscle. Every time she adjusted her stance, someone responded, cushioning a leg, placing a cloth, or pouring water. The bond between human and elephant had grown tangible, palpable in the shared space of sweat, dust, and quiet determination. She raised her trunk to reach the ground, pausing mid-motion. The villagers held their breath, sensing her subtle hesitation. Her body had absorbed enough human proximity to trust, but every movement remained a negotiation. Her patience tested theirs, and theirs matched hers. From the far edge of the clearing, the youngest volunteers fetched additional leaves to line her resting area. The elephant's gaze followed them, softening ever so slightly at their careful steps. She accepted the offering without flinching, bending to graze lightly, signaling a fragile comfort within the group. It was a small victory, yet monumental for those who had witnessed her approach alone the day before. The air hung thick with anticipation as a man quietly adjusted her blanket to prevent chafing. He paused, hand hovering near her side, waiting for her reaction. She remained still, breathing steady but cautious. That moment crystallized the depth of their connection. No words, only shared intuition and unwavering attention. Even her minor discomforts became lessons. The villagers learned to read slight shifts in ear position, subtle movements in tail and trunk, and changes in her breathing. Each adjustment informed the next, a continuous conversation conducted in patience and care. Their unity had become an extension of her own will, responding to strain before it escalated. The child, who had peeked from the doorway the previous night, now approached under careful supervision. She reached toward a water bowl nearby, and the elephant lifted her trunk slightly, acknowledging the presence without imposing fear. It was a quiet teaching. Even the youngest could be part of the collective effort without disrupting trust. As midday approached, the elephant shifted her weight, drawing attention to a subtle ache in her back leg. Several villagers responded instinctively, placing supportive mats and adjusting her posture. Her subtle communication demanded vigilance, compelling humans to observe minute signals with precision. Each gesture strengthened the bond and reinforced their shared responsibility. A low wind stirred, bringing with it scents of the surrounding forest. She inhaled sharply, ears flaring, then relaxed. Nature had returned to normal around them, yet the clearing remained a sacred enclave. Humans and elephants existed within it as one organism, each action mirrored by the other, trust dictating every movement. The villagers began sharing stories of previous encounters with wildlife, now infused with reverence rather than bravado. Laughter was rare, but small smiles appeared, softening tense expressions. The elephant responded with gentle shifts, as if acknowledging the human spirit alongside her own. She had drawn them together not merely for aid, but for recognition of interdependence. The sun descended slowly, shadows stretching across the clearing. Even as fatigue set in, no one left. They had become custodians of her survival, as much as she had been a teacher of endurance, patience, and trust. Their shared heartbeat, metaphorical yet undeniable, pulled them through exhaustion toward a unity that had not existed before. And in that growing stillness, one thought remained suspended in the air. Could a village, bound together by the quiet presence of a single life, truly withstand the trials that the next hours would demand? Stay with us as the untold details rise to light. The moment life refused to wait. The clearing held its breath. A tension unlike anything the villagers had felt before pressed into every corner of the space. The elephant shifted, a deep tremor moving through her limbs, signaling a new stage of urgency. It was not subtle this time. The change in her body demanded attention, a warning that something monumental was about to unfold. Her sides rose rapidly, each breath shorter than the last as she braced herself. The previously controlled movements now became urgent, focused on a single invisible point deep within her. People instinctively stepped back, but remained close enough to observe, ready to react to any sign. Fear had transformed into a vigilant patience, and even the faintest motion carried weight. Water was poured slowly near her feet, not for drinking, but to cool the dried dust that clung to her legs. Leaves and cloth were shifted cautiously to make space, every action calculated to reduce strain. The villagers had learned her rhythms well by now, reading the smallest changes in posture, subtle twitches in her ears, shifts in the sway of her trunk. Each signal brought immediate response. A sudden low rumble escaped her chest, vibrating through the earth. It was neither threatening nor playful, but a sound of concentrated effort. The elephant lowered her head and trembled slightly, drawing a hush over the gathered humans. In the tension of the moment, the forest beyond seemed to pause as well, as if nature itself awaited the outcome. Her trunk curled protectively around the front of her body, then slowly extended to sweep away small stones and debris. Each deliberate movement conserved strength and kept the focus on what was coming. Even her tail remained still, a sign that she was controlling every instinctive reaction with precision and patience. The first signs arrived quietly. A tiny swell, a subtle pressure that barely shifted the ground, yet was impossible to ignore. Her muscles tensed in a controlled wave, rising and falling as she adjusted herself. The villagers recognized immediately. Birth had begun. There was no time to second guess, no room for hesitation. A young man fetched more water, returning slowly with careful steps. He knelt nearby, hands ready to assist if needed, but waited for acknowledgement. She permitted nothing intrusive. Every gesture she allowed was a lesson in timing, restraint, and trust. Her body had become both teacher and test. The rhythm of labor was unlike anything witnessed before. Each contraction was measured, the elephant bracing and releasing in deliberate cycles. The villagers spoke only in whispers, exchanging observations, interpreting tension, and adjusting the environment. Cloths were shifted, leaves rearranged, water poured, each motion precise, each pause observed. No one acted impulsively. Hours stretched into what felt like moments. The forest hummed softly in the background, a natural symphony underscoring the monumental event. Light shifted as the sun climbed, revealing new details. Sweat darkening her skin, subtle tremors traveling along her massive legs, the gentle sway of her head as she balanced discomfort with control. Then, the climax arrived silently. The calf emerged into the world, small and delicate, yet immediately recognizable as part of its mother. The elephant lowered her trunk to guide the newborn gently, allowing life to find its first breaths under the careful watch of human hands. The moment was raw, sacred, and irrevocable. A collective exhale swept through the villagers, relief mingling with awe. They had never witnessed life begin so close, in such peril, or with such trust invested in them by an animal that had risked everything. The elephant's gaze shifted from them to the calf, a mix of exhaustion and triumph etched across her enormous frame. Even as the newborn stirred, the clearing remained silent except for measured breaths. The villagers understood the magnitude of the event. They had shared in something rare, something that would leave its mark forever. And as they watched the calf nuzzle against its mother, one question lingered with quiet intensity. When life refuses to wait, how far can courage, patience, and trust carry those who witness it? Stay here as we reveal everything. Strength returns, but something is missing. The calf nestled beside its mother, small legs trembling as it tested the strength it had just been granted. The elephant, now upright again, shifted her weight carefully, muscles still tight with the memory of labor. Relief rippled across the villagers' faces, yet beneath it lingered a subtle, unsettling awareness. Something important remained unresolved. Her movements were deliberate, measured, yet lacked the fluid grace of full recovery. Each step seemed heavier, every sway of her massive frame a reminder of exhaustion and strain. While the calf suckled, she remained vigilant, ears flicking, eyes scanning the perimeter. Survival instincts persisted, yet her usual confidence had softened, replaced by a quiet wariness that was both poignant and commanding. Villagers noticed how she used her trunk differently now. Where once it had lifted gracefully to explore or gesture, it now extended carefully to the ground or toward the calf, avoiding unnecessary effort. Each motion told a story of regained strength tempered by lingering weakness. Even in triumph, her body carried caution. The calf occasionally stumbled, causing her to lower her head and adjust, a gentle nudge reinforcing the bond. It was a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the raw power she carried moments before. People began to understand that recovery was not only physical, it was emotional, shaped by the intensity of what had just occurred. Her gaze lingered on each helper for a fraction of a second, acknowledging their role in her survival without overt dependence. Small injuries along her legs, ignored during the chaos of birth, became more visible as she rested. Bruises darkened beneath her white skin, faint scratches catching the light. These were souvenirs of the journey, marks of endurance that no one could erase. The villagers began quietly tending to them, damp cloths placed with precision, mud gently wiped away, creating a delicate dialogue of care and attention. Even her breathing shifted subtly, showing moments of strain as she adjusted her posture. Every rise and fall was a reminder that, despite the miraculous birth, the elephant's full strength had not yet returned. It was a silent testament to the cost of crossing boundaries, trusting humans and giving life under pressure. The calf explored cautiously, circling its mother, nudging at her trunk and sides. She responded with small, controlled movements, never losing patience but displaying the fatigue etched into every muscle. Watching her, villagers felt a combination of pride, fear, and humility. This was a creature both magnificent and vulnerable, surviving against odds that would have daunted even the most seasoned animal. Evenings brought shadows stretching long across the clearing, yet she remained attentive. No matter how tired, she followed the subtle movements of the village and her newborn. Her attention created a rhythm, a heartbeat that the people mirrored unconsciously. The village had been reshaped by the encounter, each individual now sharing a silent covenant of responsibility. Something still weighed on the group. Her eyes occasionally drifted toward the forest line, dark and uncertain. Though she had accepted their aid, the wild within her lingered. Freedom and survival were etched into her DNA, and the village could feel the pull of the world she had left behind. It was a subtle tension, a reminder that nothing could replace the natural life she had interrupted to give them a glimpse of trust. For the villagers, the moment was bittersweet. Strength had returned to the mother elephant. Life had blossomed in the calf, yet an unspoken awareness remained. Their bond, though extraordinary, had limits. Nature had not yet released her from instinct, nor had human hands fully earned her confidence. The night closed in, and the calf slept beside her. The elephant remained upright, vigilant, poised between recovery and the unknown path ahead. She had survived. She had given life. Yet the clearing held an emptiness as palpable as her newfound strength. And, in that silence, one question hovered like a shadow over the hearts of everyone present. When a miracle arrives, yet parts of it remain beyond reach, how do those who witness it honor both triumph and loss? Come along as we uncover the hidden story. The gift that redefined gratitude. The sun hung low, painting the clearing in molten gold as the elephant shifted her massive frame with careful deliberation. Her calf nestled against her side, exploring its new world with tiny, uncertain movements. Yet the villagers sensed something more in the air than the quiet rhythms of survival. There was a presence, a message embedded in the way she moved, in the pauses she allowed, in the deliberate gaze she cast at each person. Slowly, she stepped toward a small pile of leaves and stones someone had arranged earlier as bedding. She paused, lifting her trunk and letting it hover above the arrangement, then pressed down gently. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, yet it carried a weight that the villagers could feel. It was as if she were leaving behind something tangible, a token of trust and acknowledgement. A few children leaned forward, wide-eyed, noticing a small, pale, tusk-shaped fragment dislodged from her lower tusk. She had broken it herself, intentionally, and placed it atop the bedding. The villagers understood immediately. It was a gift, a part of herself offered in gratitude for their care. In elephant culture, such acts were rare, often signifying deep bonds or profound trust. This was more than an animal recognizing aid. It was a conscious, symbolic gesture that transcended instinct. A woman reached out slowly, hand hovering over the fragment without touching it. The elephant's dark eyes followed her movement, steady and unflinching. No aggression, no fear. She had chosen to reveal this part of herself, and the villagers felt the enormity of the honor. To receive a gift in such a deliberate way from a creature so rare, so extraordinary, was to understand a connection far beyond human comprehension. Her trunk swept lightly over the calf, reassuring it, then extended outward, brushing against the leaves and the small token again. Each movement was measured, purposeful, a demonstration of thought and reflection. It was not mere coincidence. The elephant had calculated this moment, embedding meaning into action. People exchanged glances, whispering their interpretations in awed tones. Some spoke of luck, some of destiny, but all agreed on one thing: the gesture required recognition, care, and reverence. It was a quiet lesson that gratitude could be expressed in ways that surpassed words or even human tradition. She lingered there, calf at her side, trunk gently stroking the token once more before raising it high and returning it to the ground. Every movement carried clarity, a deliberate reinforcement of trust. The villagers instinctively gave her space, understanding that the act of gifting demanded respect and distance. Their presence was honored, not imposed upon. As the light deepened into dusk, the elephant shifted toward the forest boundary. Her movements were slower, each step carefully measured. Yet, as she walked, she paused, glanced back, and lowered her trunk slightly, a silent farewell that conveyed gratitude without words. The villagers stood frozen, hearts full, realizing that she had given them a piece of her world, her culture, herself. The calf trotted alongside her, unsteady but protected, their bond radiating in the waning light. The clearing felt emptier even as her departure began. Dust swirled around her feet, catching golden rays, leaving a visual echo of her presence that would linger in memory long after the last step faded. Even the forest seemed to exhale, accepting the mother and calf into its embrace while leaving behind a trace of the extraordinary encounter. For the villagers, the day's labor had become a lesson, a miracle, and a story sewn into their hearts forever. They had witnessed life, endurance, trust, and finally gratitude expressed in a way no human hand could replicate. And in the stillness that followed her final pause, one question remained, unspoken yet pressing. How does a single act of generosity, born of instinct and trust, redefine the way humans understand their own capacity for gratitude? Stay with us to uncover what comes next. The story that became part of the land. The forest received them quietly, mother and calf moving through shadows that had once felt impenetrable. Every branch they passed seemed to bend gently, as if recognizing the extraordinary journey that had carried them from human land back into the wild. Dust from the clearing swirled behind them in fading trails, catching the light of dawn and leaving an almost ethereal memory of their passage. Villagers followed from a distance, careful not to intrude, yet unable to resist the pull of curiosity. The elephant's pace was steady, her calf learning each step under her watchful gaze. Even in retreat, she moved with a purpose that demanded attention, a lesson that boundaries, once crossed, leave traces not easily erased. As they vanished between dense trunks, the air seemed to hold a new weight. The people of the village understood that their lives had been subtly altered. Paths they had walked countless times now felt different, as if the earth itself remembered the rhythm of the elephant's steps. That imprint was more than physical. It was emotional, invisible, but undeniable. Stories began almost immediately. Children recounted every detail, the color of her skin, the way she had lowered her trunk, the precise moment she had offered her gift. Elders spoke in hushed tones, reflecting on the trust she had extended, the lessons embedded in her patience, and the miraculous birth they had witnessed. What had started as awe grew into a shared understanding that this event was beyond ordinary experience. Even the land seemed changed. Grass along the clearing grew back greener and softer, as if nourished by her presence. Trees appeared taller, their branches swaying more gently, sheltering the memory of what had occurred. Streams nearby seemed clearer, more deliberate in their flow, as though nature itself honored the life that had passed through. Villagers discovered small reminders scattered across the ground. Stones slightly moved, leaves pressed in patterns, tufts of her hair caught on low branches. Each fragment became a tangible connection to the extraordinary, a proof that the story was real, not just a tale told around fires. These tokens transformed ordinary objects into sacred reminders, linking human memory to the wild in ways no one could explain fully. The calf, barely a day old, had already begun exploring the small world beyond the clearing. It stumbled, slipped, and then corrected itself, guided entirely by the mother. Watching it, villagers realized the depth of instinct and nurture embedded in wildlife, lessons humans often overlooked in their own rush of life. Each step of the newborn carried both vulnerability and resilience, a mirror for the community's own journey through trust and care. Even as time passed, the tale of the albino elephant embedded itself in daily life. Fields were walked with more caution, forests entered with more respect. The villagers spoke of compassion differently, no longer theoretical but earned through direct experience. Trust and responsibility had become tangible concepts, reinforced by the memory of the being who had crossed every boundary to teach them. Some nights, villagers reported glimpses of a pale form moving at the edge of the forest, always at a distance, never threatening. Children would whisper to one another, convinced it was her checking on them, ensuring the lessons endured. That presence became part of the village's identity, a living myth anchored in reality, reminding everyone that extraordinary events leave permanent echoes. Years later, the story was passed down, each retelling precise in its awe, yet flexible in its details, carrying lessons of endurance, trust, and humility. The villagers understood that the elephant's visit had redefined their connection to nature, to life, and to one another. They no longer saw themselves as separate from the forest. Instead, they felt woven into its ongoing narrative. And as the sun rose over the clearing once more, one final thought lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed the event. Were you amazed by how the villagers responded, and by the elephant's unforgettable gift? Comment which moment stayed with you.